Right now, I think getting young people engaged is really important, and people born since 1970 are much less engaged in the political system. When we segment them, we call the idealistic youth the new Aquarians. They're great. You know, they want to start NGOs, or they want to join an NGO, and political parties seem kind of anachronistic to them. But if that's the way they're going to go, then we're going to have a different kind of democracy, only getting together and doing demonstrations when things are really bad. So let's not give up on representative democracy, but it's not the only thing. And so I think that's what we need in the 21st century, is some blending of direct democracy and of representative democracy. And that's, I think, what we're hoping young people get that message. It's great that you're here. I know you're in elementary and secondary schools and trying to mobilize those young people who are watching what the older people are doing with their democracy. And what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of what I've been doing in the polling world. In 1976, we began a survey program called Focus Canada, and it was designed to measure public opinion on important public policy issues and social trends in Canada. We did quarterly surveys for a very long time, until, you know, for about, how many years am I saying? Over 33 years. In 2010, the way the thing operated was it's syndicated. So we do these quarterly surveys. We do a report called the Focus Canada Report, and it's subscribed to typically by government departments and agencies, provincial governments, municipal governments, lobby groups, and that sort of thing. But the federal government, how many years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, through an edict from the central agency, the Prime Minister's office, or the Privy Council office, precluded departments and agencies in the government from subscribing to syndicated survey research. So this had made a big dent in our business plan, and so we kind of stopped doing Focus Canada for a while. And then I determined I'd started an institute, the Environics Institute, to give voice to those not normally heard from, asking questions not normally asked. And we surveyed Canadian Muslims in Canada. We did a big urban Aboriginal people study a couple of years ago. And we have other projects, including one in Israel and Palestine that we want to do. But with the termination of the Focus Canada service, I made a determination then that another group that we probably needed to hear from were the Canadian people through the medium of survey research. So I've continued the program. We want to provide credible, independent public opinion research on issues that are important to Canadians. This study that I'm presenting today is a survey that was done last fall. I'm hoping to do it again next fall and the fall after that. CBC is supporting this research. The Canadian Opinion Research Archive, which is in Queen's University, my alma mater, is also supporting it, and I'm hoping that others will support the program as well. So research methods similar to tracking, so the numbers, the methodology we've used are consistent over the years. 2,000 Canadians are surveyed. Now, of course, this is, imagine, 2,000 Canadians still are willing to answer the telephone, cell phone, and so on. And you say, okay, this is really important stuff, a lot of topics of public policy that you might be interested in. And when they figure out that you're not trying to sell them something, then they often do answer these crazy questions. And when you see the topics covered, you can see how much time actually people would have to spend with our interviewers to answer all these questions. So this is last fall. We did this latest survey. You're going to see tracking as well, like surveys done previously. And there's even some comparative data in there as well. So I really like to know, how are these things changing over time? Same, this is science, right? Is tracking over time and comparative. How are these guys different from the Americans or the Europeans and so on? And that's what I hope I'm bringing to the presentation this afternoon. So we have a range of public policy issues, as I've said. Some of these items go back to 1976. And actually, the Focus Canada database is the only one that does do this. And with the cancellation of the compulsory long form by the federal government, we are going to actually lose some significant capacity to look at social change in our country. And if we actually decide that the science and the Enlightenment were tragic errors, and that we should go back to a religious conviction or anecdote as a basis for public policy, then we're headed in a very good direction. I'm not partisan at all. I was a progressive conservative at Queen's University in 1965-69, and up at the Royal Ontario Museum beside Tyrannosaurus Rex and Brontosaurus is progressive conservative man and woman, and Joe Clark and I and a few others will be proudly displayed there someday. So we have 135 questions. The topics, look at this. So people are on the phone, you know, with really important things on TV, I'm sure, to watch, but we say, could you take 20 minutes to talk about the economy and our standard of living, the Canadian identity and the symbols. We're going to talk about the Federation and language. They're already getting tired just thinking about institutions and governance, healthcare, environment, Aboriginal peoples, immigration, multicultural, crime, justice, social issues, Canada's role in the world. I think after you do this, you probably should get an Order of Canada for just staying on the phone with our interviewers. But that's what we decided we wanted to do. And the reason I want to do it is that I want it known. I want when people are doing expert commentary on our newspapers or on their blogs, and they want to know what people think about, you know, crime. Is it increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same? Or whether it's safe to walk in your neighborhood after dark. I want to know whether that's changed or not. And I've got a slide up here that it's just astounding. And the perception of feeling safe and walking in your neighborhood after dark hasn't changed at all in 30 years. Has Canada changed in 30 years? You bet. So it's a non-finding that is astoundingly significant. Anyway, there's more of this stuff here, so stay tuned. Setting this up, are we changing? We have a conservative government, so are we becoming more anxious because of the economy? Are we becoming more conservative because we have a conservative government? Are we becoming more insecure because of ethnocultural change? Even are we scared of the other? All these people coming, they're not coming from Europe anymore. Has this got us terrified? Well, what the data tells us is that we are confident, but we're not cocky. Of course, you can't. If you're a Canadian, you can't be cocky, because if you're cocky, then God will hear you and take it all away. So what we have to do is we're ostentatiously understated. This is the Canadian way. The only way we can actually tell the truth is to be ironic about it, to say the opposite of what we mean, and then that shows deep conviction on the part of the Canadians. And our moral superiority, of course, is feeling superior to the Americans, and that's because we don't feel superior to the Americans, and that makes us feel that we are superior to them. So that's the elevator. That's Michael Adams' history of Canada and who we are. There's little scarring from the recent so we dodged a bullet, most of us. We are confident in our social welfare system that we put together, but we're thinking it's pretty big and it's probably pretty inefficient, and wasting $1 billion on this and that, I don't know, that seems like a lot of money. Like, I could take some great trips if I had $1 billion, right? I mean, you could visit Vegas for the rest of your life and probably lose every time, So we're kind of getting a little annoyed, and this is going to be a problem for Mr. McGuinty, I think, coming up, is just people are going to attack him for this little error and that. Well, they've been in government for a while and so on. So anyway, that's something that we come up with. We are actually comfortable with that evolving diversity. Interesting. So you're going to see some numbers on that. What do we think about all this, the world coming to Canada? And we think that we believe in the Boy Scout role, but we think we ought to be doing a lot more than just being Boy Scouts and just doing peacekeeping. There are a lot of other ways that we ought to be engaged with the rest of the world. So this is, I'm telling you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, like a good journalist is supposed to do. So we are satisfied with our standard of living. This is the proportion you see: very satisfied, somewhat satisfied. So you're up at 75% of us, or very or somewhat, with about 20% of us who are somewhat or very dissatisfied with our standard of living. Most feel they're better off than a decade ago. 46% say better off, about the same as 33%. Again, you've got a lot of people retiring, seniors and so on, so the fact that they think they're about as well off as they were 10 years ago is actually quite remarkable because they're out of the labor force now. So that's also a testament to the fact we've got a reasonably good pension system in the country. Canadians are more satisfied with the direction of their country than people living almost anywhere. China, 87%, they were rocking and rolling, those guys. They think it's pretty cool, making all this money. We're 52, and then Brazil and so on. But look at this, Canada's 52, and look at our American cousins down at 30. This is, again, something that I think, you know, when you saw the debates, and I hope your kids watched some of that too, you know, Mr. Harper's saying, you know, it should be the economy and people are feeling pretty good. He's actually reflecting that sense that in terms of the direction of the country, the economy and so on, we Canadians are doing pretty well. 9 in 10 feel that the quality of life north of the border is better. This is one I guess I framed and sent to my cousins in Michigan. You know, when I was a kid in the 50s and we'd get together at Christmas time up in Bruce County and Walkerton, I mean, we were always bragging, right? The Michiganders and the Ontarians and so on. And I can tell you in those days, I mean, Canada being seen as superior to the United States, I mean, they could make cars. Detroit, they made beautiful cars. We didn't make any cars like that. They did. And so it would seem to me that this is something rather new, and I wish we went back longer in this, but this is 73% in 1985 felt quality of life north of the border was better, and now we're up to 90%. And you know, the standard of living, quality of life, but when you put it all together, that's a pretty astounding proportion of Canadians who feel that we're doing better than our American cousins. Most Canadians see the free market as the best system in the middle of the pack internationally. Look at the country that's #1 on the free market. Our buddy Chairman Mao must be spinning in his grave thinking that he's got a bunch of people in communist China who think the free market is the way to go. Nigeria, India, look at these. Think of, you know, you've got a third of the world, you know, in, or a third, you've got 1 billion people in China, 1 billion people in India. And these people are thinking the free market is the engine of growth. So these are pretty remarkable consensus in these countries. Canada, we're out there at 68% who like this free market. And it's the same as the United States, which is quite interesting, that in both countries we actually think, about 7 in 10 of us think, that's the way, that's the engine of growth. And again, we're in about the middle of the pack internationally, but following China. Wow. But here's an interesting one. Most see the growing gap between the rich and the poor. So, and this is again tracking since 1990, do you think the gap between the rich and the poor has widened, not changed, or narrowed? 2/3 of us think that the gap has widened between rich and poor. So in other words, the winners are winning more and the losers are losing more than it used to be in the past. And that's actually true if you look at the data. We're now moving to almost back to the Gilded era, you know, of the 1880s and 1890s, and where you get the rich being very, very rich. You get the Rockefellers and Morgan and all the very wealthy Americans in oil and railroads and so on. So we have 2/3 of us think it's widened, 22% not changed, narrowed only 6%. So that's kind of interesting. What is even more interesting is 81% of Canadians agree that the government should narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. 80% of us. This is the majority of people who would vote Green, New Democrat, Liberal, and Conservative. We don't like this. We don't think it's right. And this is obviously tracking that's gone on for 20 years. Right now, there's no one issue kind of dominating. This hasn't really changed much over the last 6 months, and now we're into an election. 21% of us think the economy is the #1 issue. Unemployment, 12. Healthcare, environment, and so on. So it's basically no one issue is dominating. You can see historically there have been times when unemployment was the issue that people were concerned about. There were times when health care was the number one issue. Every once in a while, the economy or the environment peaks through. The late 80s, you see environment. And then back here in 07, 08, typically there's some environmental disaster that whacks us, and then the environment suddenly becomes salient. And then finally, war and international conflict. And again, when something breaks out, that jumps to the top too. Economic anxiety is waning in Canada. This is, are you worried or not worried? 6 in 10 of us are not worried about our economy. 40% are. So we're back up to kind of the confidence we had before the economic troubles of a couple of years ago. We're not ready to go on a shopping spree. 51% of us say it's not a good time to buy. 39% think it is, but the consensus is that this is a time to kind of wait and see and not splurge on big ticket items. Majority think the Canadian tax system is unfair, but less so than historically. Is it a fair or unfair system? It's, we started this in 1985. 65% of us felt it was an unfair system. It's now down to 55%. And those who think it's fair have gone up from 28 to 41%. This is another one to frame and to put on your wall. Now, just a minute, we have to spit this out on a telephone, okay? So some people think taxes is mostly a positive thing because they are the way we help pay for important things that make the quality of life good. Healthcare, education, roads are given as the examples. Other people think taxes are mostly a negative thing because they take money out of the pockets, people's pockets, and hold back economic growth and the creation of wealth. So we try to be fair and balanced in this argument, but we want to give people an idea that when we do pay taxes, it does do stuff, like it educates people and gives us health care and we can pave our roads. 70% of Canadians believe that taxes are worth paying, and 22% think they're bad. This is astounding because what it is saying is that when we give our money to the government, our municipal government, our provincial and our federal government, generally, even in spite of some inefficiencies and so on, overall, the bargain's worth it. I don't know any jurisdiction in the United States where you would have this kind of result. Because in the U.S., when you campaign to lower taxes. And if you gave, let's say you said, I'm going to give you $1,000 to protect yourself or to educate your kids or health care or something, or I'll give it to the government, an American would say, are you crazy? Give me the $1,000, I'll move it to a good neighborhood where we'll have a good public school. Give me $1,000 and we'll build a moat around the house and put in a security system and of course make sure there's a weapon in the glove compartment and in the bedside table. I'll take care of my own security, thank you very much. And yeah, the government with Medicare, are you crazy? The wrong people are going to be benefiting from that. So it's a pretty astounding finding that 70% of Canadians generally think that their taxes are worth paying. This view has been affected by the HST, so putting the GST and the local provincial sales tax together. You can see that both in Ontario there's been a decline because we're doing it here, and in British Columbia there's been a decline and it was pretty controversial there, and I think they're even going to have a referendum on the thing out in BC. But generally across the country there is support. Look at Alberta, 74% of Albertans. These are supposed to be the cowboys that want to get rid of government, right, and join Arizona in some union. But it's a stereotype that's not true. 3/4, 74% of Albertans think that taxes are worth paying. So a large majority of us are proud to be Canadian. 74% are very proud, 21% somewhat proud, and 4% are not very or not at all proud. Who are proud? Well, everybody but Quebec. 43% are very proud, and another 43% are somewhat proud. I love that second 43%. These are the kind of contingent Canadians feeling very strongly about Quebec, but also proud of Canada, particularly if our hockey players can beat Russians or Americans or something like that. But those 43% who are somewhat proud of the people that determine the outcome of these referenda on whether they're going to leave or stay in Canada. But that 86% of Quebecers, when you add it up, will tell you they're proud of being Canadian. I think it's great. That's why we have the Just for Laughs Museum in Montreal, right? Why are we proud of being Canadian? Well, we think it's a free country, it's freedom and democracy. Isn't this what Americans are supposed to say? That it's a free country, right? Home of the brave, land of the free. And this is open-ended question. We're not asking them to choose. They like freedom. Now, we have a guy running for the Prime Minister, Michael Ignatieff, quite of an intellectual, and he wrote a book by Isaiah Berlin, a wonderful book. Actually, it was the last thing he wrote that I agreed with. But anyway, Michael wrote this great book about Isaiah and about liberty. And there are different kinds of liberty. There's freedom to do stuff. Americans love that. And then there's freedom from, like freedom from fear or freedom from poverty and all of that sort of thing. And then there's freedom to be me. And what the Canadians like is all three kinds of liberty. I have freedom to do stuff. I have freedom from a lot of economic insecurity and so on. And I have the freedom to be me, right? I can be me. And that comes from gender equality, and it comes from multiculturalism, where we say, well, yeah, you got to be Canadian, but you can be, you can keep your traditions, your religion, and so on. So I think it's amazing that the Canadians love freedom. We like our quality of life. We think we're humanitarian and caring. We like multiculturalism, healthcare, peaceful country. I don't know, this all looks like a list of cliches, but that's what they tell us they love about their country. Canadians identify with their country before their province, with two exceptions. You'll know one, but you will not know the other one. Ontario, of course, identifies with Canada over the province. That's because we own Canada, or at least we used to, and we still carry on the myth that we do, but so it takes you a long way, I guess. Manitoba, a suburb of Ontario. I know you Winnipeggers, you're going to love to jump me in the hallway. Okay. And then British Columbians, believe it or not, even though they're on the other side of the mountains, they like us, I guess. We allowed them to have the Olympics, so maybe they like us for that. And then Alberta, wow, look at that. Alberta loves Canada more than Alberta, feels a primary identity. Atlantic Canada, now there's strong regional identity in Atlantic Canada. Newfoundlanders, Prince Edward Islanders, Nova Scotians, right, they really strong regional identity, but they're still Canada outpoles the region or the province in that area, so there's two left. Saskatchewan, interesting. And the reason for that is that they're getting rich. And they're kind of the new Alberta. And they've been the little cousins, the little sister or the little brother to Alberta for a long time. And they really hate it. And I'm sure there's nothing they like better than beating an Alberta team like Edmonton or Calgary in football, or I guess they can't do it in hockey. Curling, thank you. If they could beat out, they just love it, right? And so they're feeling like kind of provincialist. Isn't that interesting? And of course, the other one is quite obvious, is Quebec, which there's a primary, I'm a Quebecer, and then I'm a Canadian second. Foreign-born feel Canadian first. So this is, do you feel more a citizen of Canada or more of a citizen of your country of birth, or a greater, I guess, it's a stronger attachment, sorry, it's not citizenship, but a stronger attachment. Again, this is one of, I find pretty astounding. I mean, you come from another place, your home where you were born, your relatives may be there and all of that sort of thing, and 78% are saying, no, I feel a stronger attachment to Canada. And 13% country of birth, and 7% both equally. It is ironic, actually, that in Canada, the longer you're here, the less likely you are actually to feel an attachment to the place, which is because I guess you catch on to what, the corruption and all the stupidity in this country or something. But the immigrants come and they just adore the place. 3 or 4 generations, they're okay. But people who've been here for 2,000 or 3,000 years, they're not so attached to Canada because we haven't been very nice to them. I just, again, this is the ironic Canadian perspective. Large majority see our healthcare system. This is now how important do you feel the following are to our identity. So healthcare, so that's number 1. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Canadian flag, our national parks, and our national anthem, right? So 2/3 or more, and you can see pretty consistently since 1997 over the last 10 or 15 years. The next tier are the RCMP, in spite of the trouble they sometimes get into. We have Canadian literature and music, and look at multiculturalism. 1997, 37%, and now it's up at 56%. The more multicultural we are, the more we are embracing the idea of multiculturalism as being part of our identity. And I think on the debate, Mr. Harper, I was just thrilled, actually. I thought he was astoundingly eloquent in his defense of multiculturalism. I'm asking for a transcript. I'm going to use it in my next presentation because I thought it was something, since the Liberals had kind of invented it, that the Conservatives might not embrace, but he appears to be doing that. So I'm delighted we have an all-party. By the way, in Quebec, they don't like multiculturalism, they like interculturalism. And of course, this could be the narcissism of small differences. I don't know. But if they want to call it interculturalism, it's fine with me. Then we have hockey. I don't know whether anybody in Toronto says that, because, although we have a team, don't we? We have a hockey team. The CBC, bilingualism, and the national capital, Ottawa, and then the Queen. Now this is a poll this was done, when did I say, last fall, in September, October, before the betrothal of a girl named Kate and a guy named William. So I will do this survey again this fall, and that will probably become number 1, particularly if they agree to come here and, reign over Canada, I guess. It's nice to have royals that you think, like, it's been a long time since we had Henry VIII, where a royal actually looked like someone who would actually enjoy being in bed with somebody of the opposite sex. I think this. All right, I'm just testing that line. I'm going to give it to Russ Peters. He can use a kind of a. Okay, did I survive that one? All right, so the Canadian Federation. All right, so this is winning conditions in Quebec remain elusive but not impossible. So this is present status for Quebecers being in Canada. So back in '86, 52% were happy with the present status. Now it's 32%. So this is why Jack Layton's now talking about maybe constitutional talks, which of course we all love, Jack. Thank you very much. But anyway, that's what he's saying in Quebec. So 32% like the present status. Independence, 23%. I love these phrases. Of course, sovereignty association, whatever that means, is 20%. And then we have special status at 18. So you can see with that kind of people embracing those kinds of terms and language, it's kind of a muddle, and that's the way some people just love it. So I would say winning conditions, I mean, for independence, no, but for sovereignty association and independence, or sovereignty special status with sovereignty association and a little bit of it. Anyway, if you ask the question, depending on the leader and the phrasing of the word, you can probably get a majority. And last time, in '95, it was 50-50. So a lot of it also depends on who the leaders are. Support for bilingualism in both Canada and one's province are the highest since the mid-1970s, but I've got some interesting data here for you. So it's 60% who think we should be a bilingual country. Should you be a bilingual province? 60% agree with that, although it does vary. Quebecers think definitely, 80%. You should have French and English. Atlantic Canada, about 2/3 believe it. Ontario, 60%. It's up from 52 who think we should be a bilingual province. It then gets to minority status when you're in Manitoba, Alberta, British Columbia. So in the West, less likely because there's less Francophone presence in that region, and Saskatchewan, the least likely to think so. However, and this is kind of interesting, you guys are teachers, and I'd be interested to know, how many people are actually saying it's important that we learn the other language. So this is among importance of speaking the other official language is decreasing over time. So we're going to be a bilingual country, but how important is it that you speak the other language? And in 1985, 66% thought it was important, Anglos, to speak French. It's now down to 38%. I guess these are the people thinking, well, yeah, but wouldn't Mandarin be a little more, relevant, or learning how to speak American or some other foreign language that would help us in our dealings? And look at Francophones. 98% thought it was important to speak English. In 1985, it's now 48%. This is a tribute to the success of Bill 101, where they're saying, in our province, you should be able to raise a family, get a job, be a successful person without having to speak Anglo, without, what do we call it? English, yes. And I think actually it's kind of, now you can look at it as negative, or you can look at this as kind of positive, that people can actually live in their own language and think it's less important to have to speak the other language. Anyway, that's kind of an interesting one. Almost all Canadians now believe that young Anglophones and young Francophones have the same interests. So 96, I guess, interest in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I guess that's kind of universal. I don't know. We didn't dig into what they meant by having the same interests, but that's kind of positive. No more than a third of Westerners believe the region gets so few benefits it should go it alone. This is only 28% in 2010 versus 36% way back in '87. That's in Alberta. Of course, they're a strong presence in our federal government. In Manitoba, it's gone down, the proportion who think they should go it alone in the West. This is Saskatchewan. It's about the same as historically. In British Columbia, it's down a bit than it was historically. Canadian forces are the most trusted institutions, political parties the least trusted. This is getting into some territory that you may have been reflecting upon in your democracy boot camp. So the forces are up there and this is the top three of a 7-point scale, and this is sort of a great deal of trust in the Canadian forces, 78%, the Supreme Court, the justice system, Parliament of Canada. So from 2007 to 2010, 55 down to 42, political parties 32 down to 19. So, interesting. We love our democracy, but we don't like Parliament and we don't like parties. So, Yet Canadians are increasingly satisfied with our system of government. This is another really fascinating finding. So in 1991, 7% of us were very satisfied with our system of government in Canada. So that's federalism, the parliamentary system, the whole ball of wax. And another 27% were somewhat satisfied. 94. 03, 2010, 74% of us are satisfied with our system of government, but we don't like Parliament and we don't like political parties. All right, this will require a political philosophers to tell us what is going on. So we've actually got a great country, things are going well, it's just politics that's no good. And it's kind of an interesting thing because it could well be that part of the apathy and the disengagement comes from the fact that people are kind of more or less satisfied with the way things are. And that only when you actually are dissatisfied, or there's something really great that the parties are trying to offer us, like Medicare or unemployment insurance or something we're fighting for, like our country being held together or not, those are things that actually mobilize the mass public. And when things get kind of great, then you'd say, well, like, it isn't going to change if I don't vote, right? Like, the world's, right, it's still going to be okay. And if you're young people saying, well, what are they debating? Is there anything there that'll do me any good? And you'd say, I'm not so sure. So then you're asking young people to do their duty. Well, the boomers decided that doing your duty was for the parents. And the boomers were going to have fun. Doing your duty and not pursuing your own materialism and your own happiness seemed like a ridiculous idea. So what do you think their kids are going to think? Anyway, but things are fine. The system works. Satisfaction with the system of government spans across the country. Alberta, well, look, 22 up to 76. They've got Mr. Harper as our Prime Minister. Manitoba, Atlantic Canada, Ontario, right across the country. People, the proportion of us across the country thinking the system works. Now, if you're a federalist, you're thinking this is really great that you have a consensus that the system works. Look at this. Young people, 31% in 1991, thought the system of government was good. It's now 75%. The same generation of people who are generally disengaged from political participation. It's a challenge for you, right? If they were really dissatisfied, like young people are in places like Egypt, Libya, etc., you do get young people mobilized. Young Americans who helped Obama, they were mobilized because they'd had 8 years of George Bush. Okay, and then you can see among the elderly, they were at 48%, and they're now up to 76% satisfied with the system. Okay, so conservatives, satisfied. That makes sense. They're now running the country. Liberals, satisfied, 80%. NDP, 69%. The Bloc. The Bloc is satisfied with the Canadian political system, and they want to bust up the country. Right, okay. I think it's wonderful that we would have a country. In other countries, of course, they'd be on trial for what? Sedition, or what do you call these things? Treason, yes. Here we're handing out orders of Canada. So, healthcare. There's a diminishing sense that our healthcare system is in crisis. We've thrown a lot of money at healthcare. 52% say we're in crisis, but 43% basically in good shape. Canadians see inefficiency, not lack of funding, as the healthcare system's major problem. 64% say it's inefficient. That's our problem. We ought to make it more efficient. So this, again, is going to be something you'll probably hear from the Conservatives running against Mr. McGuinty in the upcoming provincial election. Insufficient funding, only 28% think that. So the sense is we're giving a lot of dough, let's make it work for us. Large majorities across the country favor public funding for health care. We have consensus on that. Nobody is, of course, in this federal election or in any election is going to be talking about changing that. Or should we go back to the good old days when people paid for their own and you had private insurance? No, only 14% think that. Growing majority, however, want the right to buy private health care to ensure timely access. So we got public funding, are we all like that? But we've got the baby boomers who are saying, yeah, we want the system, but by the way, if you can't provide timely access for either for mom and dad who may need it, or for me, or for one of my kids, then we ought to be able to buy private health care. So these are going to be issues. The courts are deciding on this. It's an issue that's arisen in Quebec. And so the deference to the system is something that you won't find with boomers, and there's going to be greater calls for people for timely access for medical procedures that people want. Climate change, air quality, water quality are the top of mind environmental issues, but none are predominating, so we're not hearing much about the environment in this election. 15% say climate change. Well, that's just not enough people to get any party to other than the Greens, to make a big pitch on that issue. Mr. Dion did in the last election, and it didn't do him much good, or certainly the Green Shift didn't. Air pollution, 13%, so 11%, water pollution, fossil fuel depletion of resources. So essentially there's no one environmental issue, and that's why we're not hearing as much about it in this election. However, we do believe that the climate change is something that is caused by human activity. First of all, we believe it, so this is 55% of Canadians, that science is conclusive that global warming is happening, and it's caused mainly by human activity. Another 28% say, yeah, we believe there's global warming happening, but we're not sure that humans are the cause of it. And then you've got 15% who don't believe it's happening, so they obviously don't think that humans caused it. Although that is a logical possibility, I suppose. But a growing majority support new limits on greenhouse gas emissions, even if it means higher energy costs. So 38% strongly favor that, 42% somewhat favor limits on greenhouse gas emissions. Again, we'll see, the parties are making platitudinal claims on it, but it's not really central to their platform. 65% of us think we should push for new environmental initiatives, and 32% think we should not in August 2009. So again, yeah, we ought to do something, but when anybody makes a specific proposal, it's tough. Now in British Columbia, they had a carbon tax, and that government got elected, so it is possible. It's not impossible to bring about something as innovative as a carbon tax. The public remains divided on whether the oil sands development is good or bad for Canada. But in Alberta, they're not divided at all. It is obviously good for Canada, say 69%. Aboriginal people, 6 in 10 feel at least somewhat familiar with Aboriginal issues, but there's been little movement over the last decade. Canadians are more likely than not to believe Aboriginal peoples are victims rather than causes of their problems. So this is the statement that they're asked to agree or disagree with. In your opinion, have Canada's Aboriginal peoples largely caused their own problems, or have the problems been caused by the attitudes of Canadians and the policies of government? And the attitudes of Canadians and policies of government, 52% believe that, 30% believe that it's Aboriginal people have brought on their own problems, and that hasn't changed much over the last 20 years. What should we do? Improve conditions on reserves, more economic development, this is in descending order, improve conditions for Native people in our cities, Native land claims less so, self-government less so. I think what people are saying here is change the lives of people, the legalistic issues, maybe you should put them aside and actually do stuff that actually helps people in the here and now. 9 in 10 reject a racist immigration policy. So this is, do you agree or disagree that non-whites should not be allowed to immigrate to Canada? 92%, it's at the highest level ever recorded, disagree with that, and only 7% agree that non-whites should not be allowed to come to Canada. Been tracking that for a very long time. The majority disagree that there's too much immigration. In spite of a recent spike in concern, this would be because of the recession, but essentially, it's quite interesting actually. You can see that throughout the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, more of us agreed that there were too many immigrants coming to Canada. And sometime around the turn of the millennium, we started to get more and more confident that immigrants coming to our country was a good thing. They were integrating pretty well, and they were helping the economy. And so you get a majority who disagree that we have too much immigration. A strong majority reject the idea that immigrants take away jobs from other Canadians. 73% disagree with that. Again, this is an opinion that has been pretty strong from the period since the turn of the millennium. Most people think immigrants help the economy grow, 80%, and this is again why all parties are welcoming immigration to Canada, and only 17% disagree. 2/3 believe, however, that too many immigrants do not adopt Canadian values, and this is 66%, it's up a bit. The concern as we dig into this is people who come, particularly Muslims who come, and particularly the concern is in Quebec. And the reason for this is the hijab, the niqab, which Canadians think is an emblem of religious patriarchy. And particularly Quebecers who remember in the 50s, the nuns walking around. I remember I was a Catholic boy looking like penguins and so on, and it looked like this is the way the men wanted them to dress. We got rid of that, and now we've got some people coming here, and it looks like the women are victims of religious patriarchy. Now, there are reasonable accommodations, I'm sure, for this, but that, I think, is the big concern, is that it's gender equality that people are really concerned about when people come to Canada. And if they don't embrace gender equality, we get really upset. Proportion believing crime is increasing is declining over time. So 52% say it's increasing, 37% say decreasing. Crime is, of course, on the agenda in this election. The majority prefer government invest in crime prevention over enforcement and punishment. So this asks people to choose which would be the priority. Education, prevention programs, 58% agree with that, versus 36% law enforcement, detecting crime and punishing lawbreakers. So the majority opinion is being tough on the causes of crime as opposed to being tough on criminals. Support for gun control has strengthened since 2005. So this is the federal laws in Canada concerning ownership of firearms. Law requires that Canadians register each firearm. that they own, prohibits ownership of certain firearms, requires owners to pass safety tests, requires firearms are stored, unloaded in a secure place. And strong support is 55%, and another 20% somewhat support. So 75% are in favor of our gun laws. A slim majority continue to favor capital punishment for some crimes, so it's down from 77% down to 53%. Since 1979, we're now at about, it was nearly getting to about 50-50, but it's now about 50-40 in favor of the death penalty. When you ask people, however, if you had a choice between the death penalty and life imprisonment, 69% choose life imprisonment with no parole over death. Now there's a stereotype. You send them off to prison, and they're really going to a Four Seasons hotel where they are getting a very fine service. And I think there is a perception that people are getting off pretty lightly. So this is why that can become an issue in an election campaign. Increasing majority support a woman's right to choose abortion. We use the hard language. Do you agree or disagree? Every woman who wants to have an abortion should be able to have one. We don't use this right to life and choice and all those terms. We use the term. 74% of Canadians, the highest we've ever recorded, believe that a woman should be able to choose abortion. 22% are opposed. 7 in 10 now support same-sex marriage. 43% strongly support it. 25% somewhat support same-sex marriage. So these kind of liberal, policies are something that over time Canadians are embracing. And a lot of these are correlated: death penalty, abortion, same-sex marriage. A lot of this stuff is correlated in our research. Finally, Canada's role in the world. 9 in 10 are happy with our country's place in the world. Peacekeeping and foreign aid are our main contribution. So 24, foreign aid, role model for the world, multiculturalism, and so on. Natural resources. It's interesting. You go all the way down the list, and NATO involvement, which is combat with our allies fighting bad guys, is 1%. It is pretty astounding to me, because look at the list, and this is top of mind. We don't tell people what to, or give them choices. They tell us. And it's interesting how that Pearsonian legacy of Canada being, again, what we call the Boy Scout of the world, is so dominant in the Canadian way of thinking. Peacekeeping is declining as Canada's top contribution to the world, as public adopting a broader view of engagement. So peacekeeping going to 24, but foreign aid and world example and multiculturalism, there are a range of things that people think. We did a big study called Canada's World 2 or 3 years ago, and we actually found that when it comes to foreign policy, the Canadians are our foreign policy. If you look at money sent by Canadians as remittances or to support NGOs abroad, totals well over $25 billion a year. CETA, our official granting agency, gives $4 billion a year. So when you've got 20% foreign born, 40% first or second generation, with people coming here and then feeling a sense of obligation to their home countries, it's astounding then Canada's presence in the world. But that's not our official policy. That's what Canadians are doing. And it's an unheralded indicator of how we're engaged with the world and how it's changing. Canadians are divided on whether Canadian international leadership has grown or declined in the past decade. You can see a great deal, 13%, somewhat 36%, but we're quite divided on whether we've grown or declined. This was asked before we lost our vote on the Security Council, so it may be lower than these numbers today. Canadians' opinion of the U.S. has become positive again under Obama. Many of us actually, I did a poll during the last election and asked Canadians, would you, if you're given a choice between voting in Canada or the United States, I think it was something like 20% say I'd rather vote in the U.S. because then it would really matter, like we'd be getting rid of Bush or, you'd be bringing in Obama. So you can see 73% have a favorable opinion of the United States now under the Obama administration. When we started out, that was 72 and 8. That was Ronald Reagan. And then, as you can see, and then George Bush's regime really made a difference. And we touched, just like in the Sistine Chapel, just touched. Half of Canadians hold a favorable opinion of China. We're in the middle of the pack internationally on that. Favorable opinions of China have been declining gradually than 2005. These have to do with things like civil rights and Tibet and so on. But 4 in 10 expect China will become more important to Canada than the US over time. So 40% would say over the next 10 years, China will be more important to us than the United States. So we're confident, but we're not cocky. We're not scarred too much from the meltdown of a couple of years ago. We like our social welfare state, but think it should be more efficient. We are pretty cool with Canada's growing diversity. I know actually in the schools, it's not just ethnic, racial, religious diversity, it's also sexual orientation and all sorts of other issues. I remember my son coming home from Northern telling me that, you know, here, Dad, all that religious stuff and racial and ethnic, it's all invisible to us, actually. The thing we're talking about now is how to be tolerant of, and he showed me a questionnaire, of course, you know, gender. And it used to be M and F, like when I was like really young, and now it's 9 categories, and including mine, which is doubtful. Anyway, I just love the way we are accommodating. Anyway, that's another topic. So then we have peacekeeping and becoming the world's Boy Scout, and that's my presentation. Thank you very much.